I watched from behind the faded curtain as my son's sleek black SUV pulled up beside a for sale sign he did not know was already irrelevant. He thought he was here to collect a signature, to use my cottage as collateral for his future. He had no idea the only thing being leveraged today was his betrayal. As he stepped out with the realtor, I prepared to make his world collapse. My name is Margaret Lane. I am 62 years old, and my hair is chopped short and grey because Vanity died 5 years ago, along with my husband. The cold air of a Vermont autumn morning seeped through the glass of the kitchen window, chilling the tips of my fingers, though my hands were already rough and calloused from a lifetime of digging into the earth. I stood perfectly still behind the lace curtain, a ghost in my own home, watching the gravel road that wound its way up to the cottage. The maples were shedding their leaves, covering the ground in a carpet of burnt orange and decaying brown. But the silence of the woods was about to be broken. The crunch of tires on dry leaves signaled their arrival before I even saw the chrome. Then, the vehicle crested the hill. It was a black SUV, polished to a mirror shine that looked ridiculous against the backdrop of dying trees and rustic pine. It was my son, Daniel. Following close behind him was a second car, a generic sedan, plastered with the logo of a real estate agency I had never heard of in 40 years of living in this town. The doors opened. Daniel stepped out, adjusting his suit jacket, looking sharper than I had seen him in years. But my eyes drifted immediately to the passenger side. Sophie, my daughter-in-law, emerged like she was stepping onto a red carpet. She was dressed for a high-end brunch in the city, not a morning visit to a lakeside cottage, wearing heels that would sink straight into the soft mud of the driveway. Behind them, from the second car, a middle-aged man with a thick leather briefcase hurried to catch up. They were laughing. Not one of them looked at the window where I stood. They looked at the house the way a butcher looks at a side of beef, assessing the cut and the weight, ignoring the living thing it came from. The image blurred for a second, replaced by the visceral memory of the phone call from 3 days ago. Daniel's voice had been so casual, so light. "Mum, I need your cottage as collateral," he had said. Just like that. Like he was asking to borrow a cup of sugar or a lawnmower, before I could even process the audacity of the request. Sophie's voice had chimed in from the background, smooth and manipulative. "Just think of his future. Maggie. It is the only way." I had told them yes. I had told them to bring the bank people. What I did not tell them was where I had gone immediately after hanging up the phone. I did not tell them about the appointment with the lawyer, or the ink drying on the documents that transferred this cottage into a trust they could not touch. They thought they were walking into a closing. They were walking into a trap. Daniel and the realtor were shaking hands now. Sophie stood with her hands on her hips, scanning the roofline with a gaze that screamed ownership. She held a stiff folder in her hand, ready for business, treating the paperwork inside like it was merely a formality to be rushed through. My stomach tightened, a hard knot of maternal grief and cold rage. But when I caught my reflection in the dark glass of the oven door, my face was strangely calm. The wind carried their voices through the crack I had left in the window. The realtor, a man whose suit looked too tight, clapped Daniel on the shoulder. "If your mother signs today, the bank will disperse the funds very quickly. 24 hours. Maybe 48? Sophie laughed, a high, tinkling sound that grated on my nerves. "Oh, she will sign. What else is she going to do?" "It is sad, really. Old people living alone in the woods like this." She needs us to manage things. I wiped my hands on my apron. A slow, deliberate motion. I looked around my kitchen. I looked at the coffee mug Jack used to use, still sitting on the high shelf. I looked at the height chart carved into the doorframe, marking the years Daniel had grown from a toddler into the stranger standing in my driveway. I whispered to the empty room. Today, the collateral isn't this cottage, but his future. I walked to the front door. I arranged my face into the soft, pliable expression of the doting, confused mother they expected to see. I opened the door wide. "Hello? Dears," I called out, forcing a warmth into my voice that I did not feel. Come in out of the cold." They smiled back, relieved, thinking the hard part was over. They did not know that this was not a meeting. It was the first session of a private court, and I was the judge, jury, and executioner. The silence in the house was not always this heavy. It has been 5 years since Jack died, taken from me in a stupid, senseless accident on a wet highway 3 towns over. Since that day, my life has been a quiet calculation of what remains. I still had the small townhouse in the city, which I rented out to a nice young couple, and I had this cottage by Maple Lake. Jack used to call this place our anchor. I remember summer evenings when Daniel was just a boy. His knees scraped and his skin smelling of sunscreen and pine needles. Jack and he would take the old aluminum canoe out onto the water, their laughter bouncing off the surface like skipping stones. I remember one night specifically, when a thunderstorm rolled in and knocked out the power. We built a fortress out of blankets in the living room. Jack had pulled me close, whispering in the dark. "No matter what happens out there, Margaret, this place will always belong to you. It is our sanctuary." After the funeral, my world shrank to the size of a postage stamp. I filled my days with part-time work at the Northbridge Community Outreach Fund, sorting canned goods and filing paperwork for families who had lost their way. In the afternoons, I waged war on the weeds in the garden, trying to keep the hydrangeas alive. My only real lifeline to the outside world was the glowing screen of my tablet. Daniel was working at a tech company in Boston called Asterion Data Labs back then. We would FaceTime in the evenings. He was gentle, his eyes tired but kind. "I am going to get a place with a guest room. Mum," he would say, "I do not like you being up there alone. I will bring you closer to the city." I lived on those words. I slept soundly, clutching the promise that my son still needed me. Then, he met Sophie. She was 28 years old, a freelance brand consultant with a sharp jawline and eyes that evaluated everything like it was a product on a shelf. He introduced us at a restaurant in the city with exposed brick walls and music so loud I could barely hear myself think. I wore my best Sunday dress, but sitting across from Sophie in her structured blazer and minimalist jewelry, I felt like a relic from a museum. She did not ask about my garden. She did not ask about Jack. She spent the first 20 minutes dissecting Daniel's career path. "Daniel is wasting his time at Asterion," she said, cutting into her steak with surgical precision. "He has so much potential. He just needs the right push to get into the startup game." "Right." Daniel nodded, his eyes fixed on her. "Yeah. Sophie thinks I am playing it too safe." She turned to me, her smile tight and practiced. "And you, Maggie, you must be bored to death up in that woodshed." "It is a cottage," I corrected gently, "and my name is Margaret." She waved her hand dismissively. "Maggie is friendlier. Branding, you know." Anyway, I cannot imagine living so far from civilization. Who even lives in a log cabin in the woods anymore? It sounds isolating. I felt a cold distance opening up between us, a chasm that Daniel was not trying to bridge. He was too busy laughing at her jokes, too busy admiring the way she commanded the waiter's attention. He looked at me less and less. When the wedding came, it was held at a modern resort made of glass and steel, a place that felt sterile and cold. I wrote a check for $20,000 to help cover the costs. I told myself it was a mother's duty, that this was the only time my son would get married. When I handed it to them, Sophie just tucked it into her purse. "Thanks, Maggie," she said, already looking over my shoulder at a photographer. "This will cover the floral arch." I drove back to the cottage alone the next morning. The house was quiet, smelling of dust and old wood. I took a framed photo of Daniel and Sophie from the wedding, a candid shot where they looked beautiful and invincible, and hung it on the wall next to the fireplace. I stood back and looked at it, trying to ignore the ache in my chest. "Well," I whispered to the empty room, "at least this place is still mine." I did not know then that this very thought would become the centerpiece of the tragedy to come. The erosion of my boundaries did not happen all at once. It happened in inches, disguised as necessity, and wrapped in the guilt of a mother who wants to see her child succeed. In the first few months after the wedding, the requests came in a steady, relentless stream. First, it was the security deposit for a luxury apartment in the Seaport district, because the one they could afford was too unsafe. Then it was custom furniture because the old stuff would not fit the aesthetic. Then came the monthly payments for the black SUV. "Starting a new life is so hard, Mom," Daniel would say over the phone, his voice thick with performative stress. "We just need a little runway." I started by transferring small amounts. $500 here, $1,000 there. I told myself I was helping them build a foundation. But then the mail started arriving at the cottage. I opened an envelope from an insurance company and stared at the declaration page. My name was listed right next to Daniel's as a co-signer on the policy for the SUV. He had never asked me. He had used my social security number, which he knew by heart, to lower his premium. When I called him, my hands shaking, he brushed it off. "Mom, come on. It saves us $40 a month. I didn't think you would mind helping us save money. I let it go." I swallowed the lump in my throat, because I did not want to be the petty mother who counted pennies. That silence was a mistake. A week later, Sophie asked to borrow my credit card. "Just for a few unexpected moving costs," she said, her voice sugary sweet. "I will pay you back as soon as my freelance check clears on Friday." Friday came and went. The check never cleared. Instead, the transaction alerts on my phone began to ping. $300 at a rooftop steakhouse, $250 at a day spa, $600 for VIP concert tickets. I sat in my kitchen, staring at the glowing screen, trying to reconcile their pleas of poverty with the reality of their indulgence. I wanted to scream, but I was terrified that if I confronted them, I would humiliate Daniel. I was terrified he would pull away. Then came the letter that made my blood run cold. It was from a lending institution I had never done business with. It congratulated me on the preliminary approval of a home equity line of credit based on the value of my rental townhouse. I had never applied for a loan. I called Daniel immediately. "Oh, that," he said, and I could hear him pacing. I was just checking rates. Mom, I used the old login info from when I helped you set up your iPad. It is not a big deal. You applied for a loan in my name. Daniel? I asked. My voice barely a whisper. Sophie's voice cut into the call, sharp and condescending. Oh, Maggie. Honestly, you are overreacting. The equity is just sitting there doing nothing. You do not understand financial leverage. Your generation is so afraid of money working for you. I felt a flush of shame creep up my neck, right there in my own living room. She made me feel small. She made me feel stupid and old, like a miser hoarding coins while they tried to build an empire. A few days later, the phone rang. I picked it up, but before I could speak, I realized it was a pocket dial. I could hear clinking glasses and laughter on the other end. Don't worry about the tab. Sophie's voice drifted through the speaker, loud and brash. We have the Mom Bank. No interest rates. No repayment schedule. I heard Daniel laugh. He did not defend me. He did not correct her. He just laughed. Sleep became a stranger. I spent my nights sitting at the kitchen table in the dark, my husband's old calculator in front of me. I counted every dollar of my pension. I counted the dwindling savings Jack had left me. I tried to tell myself it was temporary. I tried to tell myself they were just young and struggling. The lie finally shattered on a Tuesday afternoon at a gas station. I slid my card to pay for $40 of fuel. Declined. I tried again. Declined. I stood there, the nozzle in my hand, feeling the eyes of the attendant on me. My face burned. I had to pay with the crumpled emergency cash I kept in the glove compartment. As I got back into my car, my phone buzzed with a notification. It was Instagram. Sophie had just posted a photo. She and Daniel were in Nashville for the weekend, wearing new cowboy boots and holding expensive cocktails. The caption read, "Living our best life." I drove home in silence. When I walked into the kitchen, the monthly statement for the credit card was waiting on the counter. I picked it up. I did not need to open it to know what was inside, but I ripped the envelope open anyway. The numbers blurred before my eyes, dancing in a sea of red ink. I looked at the total, and for the first time, the fear was replaced by a cold, hard clarity. If they do not view my money as my money, I thought, staring at the paper until the edges blurred, then what do they view me as? It was a grey, miserable afternoon when the call came. A steady, cold rain was falling, plastering the dead leaves to the floorboards of the porch. I was out there with a broom, sweeping the wet mess away, fighting a losing battle against the season. The physical labor felt good. It numbed the constant, low-level anxiety that had taken up residence in my chest over the last few months. When my phone buzzed in my apron pocket, I almost ignored it, but the screen flashed Daniel's name. I wiped my wet hands and answered, "Hi, Mom." His voice was too loud, too bright. It cracked with a forced enthusiasm that I recognized immediately. It was the tone he used to use as a boy when he had broken something valuable and was trying to distract me before I found out. I have incredible news. Seriously. Life-changing. He told me he was being promoted to partner at a new fintech startup called Nova Ledger Solutions. He spoke fast, throwing around buzzwords about blockchain and equity and scaling up. He said that to secure his seat at the big table, he had to make a capital contribution, a buy-in. If he did not put the money down, he would remain an employee forever, watching others get rich off his work. I listened, leaning against the damp railing, watching the rain dimple the surface of the lake. I knew he did not have the money. I knew exactly where his money had gone. Then came the silence, followed by the request that changed everything. "Mum," he said, his voice dropping to a whisper, intimate and desperate. "I need your cottage as collateral. Just as collateral. Okay, nobody is asking you to sell it. It stays yours. It sits there on the books as security so I can get the loan for my buy-in. It will change my life. And then I can take care of you properly." I opened my mouth to speak, but the phone rustled on the other end. And suddenly, Sophie was there. Her voice was smooth, lacking Daniel's desperation, but filled with a patronizing sweetness that was far worse. "Maggie, listen," she said. "We know you are attached to the place, but honestly, it is just sitting there. It is dead capital. It is not generating any income. Collateral does not mean losing it. It just means putting an asset to work. You need to think about Daniel's future. Do not be the reason he misses his big break. Do not hold him back just because you are afraid of paperwork." I felt the air leave my lungs. It was a trap, constructed of guilt and twisted love. If I said no, I was the selfish mother hoarding a wooden shack while her son drowned. If I said yes, I was risking the only sanctuary I had left. I do not know," I stammered, gripping the phone tight. "I need to think about it. I need a few days to understand what this means." Daniel came back on the line, but he did not hear my hesitation. He only heard what he wanted to hear. "Thank you." "Mom." "Oh, thank you. I knew you would not let me down. I will tell the bank we are moving forward. I love you." The line went dead before I could correct him. I sat down heavily on the wet steps, ignoring the cold dampness seeping through my jeans. The rain fell harder, blurring the horizon where the grey water met the grey sky. I closed my eyes and heard Jack's voice, clear as a bell, from a conversation we had had 20 years ago right on this porch. "No one touches this cottage. Margaret. Not even our boy. Not unless he understands its true value. If they see it as just wood and land, they will sell it for parts." That night, sleep was a battlefield. I dreamt of a roar that shook the earth. In the dream, I was standing by the lake, but the cottage was gone. In its place was a flat slab of fresh concrete. A bulldozer sat idling in the mud, black smoke pouring from its stack. Daniel and Sophie stood on the concrete slab, dressed in white, holding champagne flutes and posing for a camera I could not see. They were smiling. They were celebrating the view, my view now that the obstruction of my home had been cleared away. I woke up, gasping for air, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. The room was dark and silent, but the terror was absolute. I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that if I let things drift, the nightmare would become a prophecy. I threw off the covers. I could not just sit here and wait for them to send papers. I need to know. I whispered to the darkness. I need to see it for myself. I decided right then that I would go to the bank the next morning, not to sign anything, but to ask questions, to understand exactly what my son was trying to do. I walked to the old oak dresser and pulled open the bottom drawer. I took out the original deed to the cottage, the paper yellowed and soft with age. My thumb traced the line at the bottom where Jack had signed his name in blue ink. The ink was faded, but the pressure of his hand was still visible in the texture of the paper. It felt like he was watching me, waiting to see if I had the strength to protect what he had built. I smoothed the paper flat. I was not going to give them an answer yet. I was going to find the truth first. The fluorescent lights of the bank lobby hummed with a sound that seemed to drill straight into my skull. I walked up to the counter, clutching the deed to my cottage in a folder that felt suddenly heavy. The teller was a young woman named Sarah, someone I had known since she was in high school. She looked up and smiled, but her expression shifted to confusion as I placed the folder on the marble counter. "Good morning, Mrs. Lane," she said, her fingers hovering over her keyboard. "Did you come to sign the supplementary forms for the loan application from Tuesday? I thought Daniel was handling that online." My heart stopped. The blood drained from my face so fast I had to grip the edge of the counter to keep from swaying. I forced my voice to remain steady, though it felt like I was speaking through a mouthful of cotton. "Loan application," I asked. "Can you show me what you mean?" "Sarah." She turned her monitor slightly so I could see. There, glowing in high definition, was a completed application for a home equity loan secured against my cottage. It listed my social security number. It listed the estimated value of the property. And at the bottom, there was a signature. Margaret Lane. It was my handwriting. The loops of the G and the cross of the T perfectly familiar. Yet I knew with absolute certainty I had never signed this document. It was a digital copy, cut and pasted from some old birthday card or tax form I had sent them years ago. The system flagged the signature because the resolution was slightly off compared to your signature card on file, Sarah explained, frowning at the screen. "We put a 48-hour hold on it. If you had not come in by tomorrow to verify it in person, the system would have automatically voided the request for security reasons." I stared at the screen. A computer glitch was the only thing standing between me and financial ruin. "Print it," I said. "Print everything. Sarah, the application, the contact info, the submission logs. Everything." She saw something in my eyes, then a darkness that frightened her enough to stop her from asking questions. She printed a stack of papers. I sat in my car in the bank parking lot, the engine cold. My hands shook as I flipped through the pages. Under the contact information section, the email address listed was not mine. It was Maggie Lane, Properties Eggmail. An account I had never created. Beside it was a phone number I knew by heart. It was Daniel's. I drove home in a daze. When I got inside the cottage, I bypassed the kitchen and went straight to my old laptop. I logged into my online banking portal, something I rarely did. I navigated to the security settings and checked the access log. Device MacBook Pro, location Boston, Massachusetts. Date October 14th. I remembered that date. It was the weekend Daniel had come up alone to help me fix the settings on my iPad because I had complained it was running slow. He had asked for my passwords to sync the accounts. He had not been fixing anything. He had been granting himself access. I dug deeper into the transaction history. Buried between a grocery charge and a pharmacy bill, I found it. A transfer of 10 cents from my savings account to an external account I did not recognize. Then, a day later, a transfer of 10 cents back. It was a test. A probe to see if the connection worked and if I was paying attention. A knock at the door made me jump. It was Lily, the young woman who lived 3 houses down. She was holding a plate of oatmeal cookies and smiling. "Hi, Mrs. Lane. I just wanted to drop these off," she said, beaming. "And oh my gosh, I have to tell you, I saw Sophie's TikTok live this morning. I am so jealous." I blinked, confusing, washing over me. TikTok, yeah. She was talking about the new lakefront retreat house project. She said it is going to be the biggest launch of her career. Look. Lily pulled out her phone and tapped the screen. Sophie's face filled the frame, filtered and flawless. She was walking down a street in Boston, talking fast. Guys, the retreat is going to be insane. Sophie's voice chirped from the tiny speaker. We are talking total wellness immersion, private lake access, rustic chic vibes. We are breaking ground on renovations next month. Look at this approach. The video cut to a shaky shot of a dirt road lined with turning maples. It was my driveway. It is going to be amazing. Right? Lily asked, oblivious to the fact that she had just shown me my own execution order. Yes, I managed to say, taking the cookies with numb fingers. Amazing. I closed the door and locked it. The silence of the cottage rushed back in, but it felt different now. It was not peaceful. It was waiting. I sat down at the kitchen table and spread it all out. The fraudulent loan application, the printed screenshots of the login history, the notes about the test transaction. They had not just asked for a favor. They had already taken the house. In their minds, I was already gone. A ghost haunting a property they had already claimed. The paperwork, the business plan, the social media marketing. It was all done. I was just the final signature they needed to make the theft legal. I looked at the picture of Jack on the wall, then down at the papers. The grief that had been my constant companion for 5 years began to evaporate, burned away by a cold, hard flame of fury. If they can plan to take my home, I said to the empty room, my voice steady and low, then I can plan to take back myself. I drove into town with a purpose I had not felt in years. I went straight to Sal's diner to meet Gloria. We had worked together at the Northbridge Community Outreach Fund for a decade. But before that, Gloria had been a union representative who could make factory owners sweat just by walking into a room. She was a black woman in her 60s, with iron in her spine and a heart she guarded fiercely. I laid it all out on the sticky laminate table. The bank printouts, the screenshots, the story of the loan. I expected her to reach out and pat my hand in sympathy. Instead, she slammed her coffee mug down so hard the spoon rattled. Hell no, Gloria said, her voice low and dangerous. This is not just a misunderstanding, Margaret. This is financial abuse. I have seen it 100 times. Just because he came out of your body, that does not give him the right to treat you like a personal ATM. She wrote a name on a napkin and slid it across to me. Elena Vega. She is with the Vega and Ashcroft legal group. She eats guys like your son's realty friends for breakfast. You call her. Now. An hour later, I was sitting in a small, impeccably organized office downtown. Elena Vega was younger than I expected, perhaps in her early 30s. But she had the sharp, assessing gaze of a hawk. She listened without interrupting as I laid out the evidence. She looked at the forged loan application, the login logs, and the printed screenshots of Sophie's TikTok boasting about the retreat house. She leaned back in her chair, tapping a pen against her chin. Mrs. Lane, what they have done here constitutes identity theft, wire fraud, and elder financial abuse. We have enough right now to go to the police. The question is, do you want to punish them, or do you want to take back control? I looked at my hands. I still love him. He is my son. I do not want to see him in prison. I just want him to stop. I want to be safe. Then we build a fortress? Eleanor said. She proposed a revocable living trust. It would take the cottage and my rental property out of my direct name and place them under the protection of the trust. I would control everything until I died, and after that, the assets would go exactly where I said they would not, where state law dictated. I want the cottage to go to a charity for elderly women, I said, the decision forming instantly in my mind. And Daniel, he can have a small stipend, but only if he meets strict conditions. Elena nodded and began typing. Then she paused and pulled a file from her drawer. Before we proceed, my paralegal pulled public records on your name this morning. We found something you need to see. She slid a document toward me. It was a general power of attorney, dated 8 months ago. It granted Daniel full authority to sign contracts, sell property, and access accounts in my name. It was notarized. I stared at the signature. It was shaky, a poor imitation of my own. Then I remembered. 8 months ago. Sophie had come over with a stack of papers she said were for the new car insurance policy I was co-signing. She had rushed me, flipping pages, pointing where to sign. She told me it was just for the insurance. I whispered, my voice trembling. She tricked me. It is a powerful weapon, Elena said grimly. But we are going to disarm it. We will draft a revocation of this power of attorney immediately. We will file it with the county and send notice to every bank in the state. She leaned forward, her eyes locking onto mine. But here is the strategy. Margaret, we revoke it legally, but we do not tell them yet. Let them think the paper is still valid. Let them walk into the meeting thinking they have the authority to sign for you. When they try to use it, that is when they provide the undeniable proof of their intent to defraud. I felt a cold shiver run down my spine, but it was not fear. It was anticipation. I picked up the pen. For the next hour, I signed my name. I signed the revocation. I signed the documents, creating the Lane Women's Resilience Trust. With every stroke of the pen, I felt the weight on my chest lifting. I was locking the doors they thought they had kicked open. When I stood up to leave, Elena walked me to the door. Go home. Margaret, she said, play the part. Be the confused, sweet mother one last time. From now on, every time they think they are leading you into a trap, they are actually walking deeper into yours. I dialed Daniel's number with a hand that was steady, though my voice was prepared to tremble. When he answered, I let a long, weary sigh escape my lips before I spoke. Daniel, I said, pitching my voice to sound like a woman worn down by worry. I have been thinking, and I am just so tired of fighting. If the bank says it is safe, and if it really helps you, then okay. Let's do it. The relief on the other end was audible. Mum, oh my God. Thank you. You are making the right choice. Seriously, I promise you will not regret this. Just bring the papers, I said softly. I just want it over with. We will be there Saturday, he promised, his voice light and unburdened. I will bring Rick and the bank rep. It will be a celebration. Almost immediately after we hung up, my phone chimed. It was a text from Sophie. She sent a digital rendering of a sleek, modern glass structure superimposed over the woods where my cottage stood. The caption read, "Look at this. Maggie. Our vision for the retreat. We are going to turn that old place into something where you never have to be lonely again." I stared at the screen, at the sterile glass box that erased the home Jack had built. I typed back. It looks very modern. Thank you. dear. I did not tell them that lonely was not the emotion I was feeling. I was feeling the cold precision of a hunter setting a snare. Following Elena's instructions, I spent the next day making calls. I invited the neighbours, including Lily and the couple from the other side of the lake, for an end-of-season barbecue. I told them it was a spur-of-the-moment gathering to enjoy the last of the autumn sun. Then I called Gloria. "Showtime," I told her. "I will be there with the potato salad," Gloria said, "and my game face." My final call was the riskiest. I dialed the number on the side of the real estate van from the photos I had taken. A man answered. "Rick speaking. Mr. Rick." "This is Margaret Lane," I said, my voice crisp and authoritative, stripping away the confused old lady act. "I know you are coming on Saturday with my son. I need you to listen very closely. I have placed my property into an irrevocable trust. It cannot be used as collateral. There will be no loan." There was a stunned silence on the line. "Mrs. Lane Butt." "Sophie told me you were on board. She said the paperwork was just a formality. Come on Saturday as planned." I instructed him, "Do not tell them I called. Just show up. I want you to hear what they have to say in front of witnesses. If you warn them, I will name you as a co-conspirator in the fraud lawsuit my lawyer is drafting." Rick stammered, his professional veneer cracking. "Look, Mrs. Lane, I did not know. Sophie has been texting me non-stop. She told me you were... Well, she said you were starting to lose your memory. She said you needed younger people to manage your assets before you became a ward of the state." I felt the blood boil in my veins, hot and sharp. They were not just stealing my money, they were preparing to steal my sanity. "Just be there, Rick," I said, and hung up. Saturday arrived with a bright, deceptive sunshine. The cottage smelled of charcoal and marinade. When Daniel's SUV pulled up, the yard was already full of people. Gloria was manning the grill, and Lily was laughing with the neighbours on the porch. Daniel and Sophie stepped out, looking confused by the crowd. "Mom," Daniel asked, looking around at the festive scene. "I thought this was just us and the bank." "Oh?" "I just wanted to celebrate," I said, walking over to kiss his cheek. "Since we are securing your future, why not have a party?" Sophie recovered quickly. She adjusted her silk scarf and beamed at the neighbours. Isn't she sweet, always the hostess? We ate on the porch. The atmosphere was jovial, but beneath the laughter, I was watching them. Sophie raised her wine glass halfway through the meal. "I just want to make a toast," she announced, silencing the table. "To Maggie, for being a true visionary. She is helping us launch Nova Ledger. And honestly, it takes a special kind of trust to leverage your home for the next generation. Cheers to Maggie." "Cheers," the neighbours echoed, not knowing the double meaning of her words. Daniel drank, but he avoided my eyes. He was busy checking his watch, his knee bouncing nervously under the table. He did not mention the credit card debt. He did not mention the fake insurance policy. He just smiled, that empty, handsome smile. As soon as the plates were cleared, Sophie stood up. "Okay, fun is fun, but we have some boring paperwork to get through. Daniel, get the folder. Mom, let's go into the living room with Rick." "Of course," I said. "Rick, please come in, and... oh, Gloria, bring that pitcher of lemonade in. Will you?" We gathered in the living room. The door to the porch was left wide open, and the neighbours were sitting just outside, well, within earshot. Elena, who had arrived quietly through the back door moments earlier, stood in the shadows of the hallway, unseen. Sophie placed a thick folder on the coffee table. She opened it with a flourish, pointing to a document on top. "Okay, Maggie," she said, her voice brisk. "We just need a signature here to get the ball rolling. It is just authorizing Rick to process the valuation." I leaned forward. I looked at the paper. It was not a loan application. It was a fresh copy of the General Power of Attorney, dated for today. But there was something else. In the signature block, where my name should be, there was a faint, pencil-marked X and a pre-printed electronic stamp that looked remarkably like the one from my old tax returns. She was not asking me to sign a loan. She was asking me to ratify a document that would give them total control, retroactively covering their tracks for everything they had already done. I looked up at Sophie. Her eyes were bright with greed and impatience. "Is something wrong?" she asked, a hard edge creeping into her voice. "Just sign it. Maggie." "We are on a schedule." I realized then that this was not just my trap for them. They had walked in here believing they were closing the steel jaws of their own trap around my neck. "Actually," I said, my voice carrying clearly out to the porch where the neighbors had gone quiet, "there is something wrong." Sophie smiled at Rick, a practiced, shark-like baring of teeth that did not reach her eyes. She placed her hand flat on the document, smoothing out a crease that was not there. "Margaret already signed the General Power of Attorney months ago," Sophie explained, her voice dripping with condescension. "Today is just tidying up. A few small updates to the addendum so we can expedite the appraisal." "Right. Daniel." She shoved the paper across the mahogany coffee table toward me, her eyes darting to Daniel. Under the table, I saw her hand clamp down on his knee, her knuckles white. She was not comforting him. She was commanding him. "Tell him, Daniel," she hissed under her breath. Daniel looked at the paper, then at me. For a second, the mask slipped. I saw the terrified boy who used to hide behind my legs during thunderstorms. He knew the original power of attorney was a lie. He knew the signature on this new paper was a digital ghost stolen from his mother's past. He looked like he wanted to vomit. "It is..." "Yeah," Daniel stammered, his voice thin. "It is just formalities. Rick, Mom knows. We have handled everything." The room went deadly quiet. I could hear the murmur of the neighbors on the porch die down. They were listening. I did not pick up the pen. Instead, I placed my hand on the folder and slid it firmly back across the table. Away from me. "Mr. Rick," I said, my voice cutting through the humid air like a scythe. "Do you know that this power of attorney was created using a scanned image of my signature from a tax return 5 years ago? And are you aware that the bank received a fraud alert regarding this exact signature 3 days ago?" Rick froze. The color drained from his face, leaving him a pasty grey. He looked from the paper to Sophie, then back to me, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. The silence from the living room spilled out onto the porch, where the neighbors had stopped chewing their cake. Sophie's face twisted. The beauty vanished, replaced by a desperate, ugly panic. She let out a sharp, incredulous laugh. "Oh, God, Maggie," she said, her voice shrill. "You are confusing things again. It is just an administrative error. I told you. Rick, she gets like this. She forgets what she signed. It is sad. Really." She reached for the paper to snatch it back, but I was faster. I opened the drawer of the side table and pulled out the crisp, heavy document Eleanor had prepared. It bore the raised seal of a notary. I slammed it down on top of their forgery. This is a formal revocation of any and all power of attorney documents, past, present, or future, I declared, looking directly at Daniel. Furthermore, as of 2 weeks ago, this cottage is no longer mine to mortgage. It is the property of the Lane Women's Resilience Trust. Daniel stared at the document as if it were a bomb. A trust. Yes, I said. An irrevocable entity designed to protect this family's assets from predators. Before Sophie could spin another lie, a shadow fell across the doorway. Elena stepped into the room, holding a briefcase. She did not look like a guest anymore. She looked like the law. "My name is Elena Vega," she announced, her voice cool and professional. "I am Mrs. Lane's attorney. I have here a letter from the bank's fraud department confirming that the loan application submitted under Mrs. Lane's name has been flagged for criminal investigation. Any attempt to use that forged power of attorney today will result in immediate charges." The air left the room. Sophie stood up so fast her chair tipped over backward with a crash. She whirled on Daniel, her face contorted with rage, abandoning all pretense of the sweet daughter-in-law. "I told you," she screamed, pointing a manicured finger at his chest. "I told you that you had to make her sign the papers before she got to a lawyer. You said you could handle her. You said she was soft. Now look, there is no way out." The confession hung in the air, naked and brutal. The neighbors gasped audibly. Rick began shoving his papers into his briefcase, desperate to flee the blast radius. Daniel's face turned a deep, blotchy red. He looked at Sophie, then at the lawyer, and finally, his eyes landed on me. But instead of shame, instead of an apology, I saw something that broke my heart more than the theft itself. I saw pure, unadulterated hatred. He did not yell at Sophie. He yelled at me. "This is your fault," Daniel roared, spit flying from his lips as he stood up. "Are you happy now? You selfish old woman, you sit here in the middle of the woods, hoarding this place, clinging to memories of a dead man. While I am out there drowning, I needed this. I needed one thing from you. I gave you everything." "Daniel," I whispered, my voice trembling for the first time. "You gave me nothing," he screamed, his voice cracking with the hysteria of a man watching his life disintegrate. "You kept this rotting pile of wood while I begged you for a lifeline. It is just a house. Why do you care more about this museum, than you care about your own son?" I looked at him, really looked at him. I saw the expensive suit he could not afford. I saw the desperation in his eyes. And I realized, with a clarity that was both freezing and liberating, that he was not a victim of Sophie's manipulation. Not entirely. He had not just been led astray. He had chosen. He had chosen the lifestyle, the status, and the greed. He had chosen to view his mother not as a person, but as a resource to be harvested. I stood up. I was shaking, but I did not look away. "I care about this house," I said, my voice low but audible to every soul in that house and on the porch. "Because it was built with love, something you clearly no longer understand." Elena reached into her briefcase and placed a small, silver digital recorder in the center of the coffee table. The soft click of the record button sounded like a gunshot in the quiet room. "This conversation is being recorded with the consent of my client," Elena stated, her voice devoid of emotion. She glanced toward the porch. And we have 4 witnesses present who are prepared to testify regarding the coercion attempted here today. The neighbors outside nodded solemnly through the screen door. They were no longer guests at a barbecue, they were a jury. Elena opened a new file, laying out documents like tarot cards foretelling disaster. "Let us review the facts," Elena said. "I have here a consolidated list of credit card expenditures totaling over $200,000. These cards are in Mrs. Lane's name, yet the point-of-sale signatures and geolocations match the devices and movements of Daniel and Sophie Lane. Then we have the loan application for the cottage, submitted with a digital signature verified to be a forgery. And finally," she slid a stack of printed emails across the table, "we have these. Emails from Sophie's business account to potential investors, dated 2 weeks ago. In them, she explicitly states, and I quote, 'The old lady is a non-factor. We will have the deed secured by the end of the month. The retreat house is ours in all but name.'" Rick, the realtor, looked at the emails. He looked at the forged power of attorney. He physically took a step back, putting distance between himself and the young couple. "I did not know," Rick said, his voice shaking. "I swear to you, I did not know about the credit cards. Sophie told me. She told me specifically that her mother-in-law was senile. She said Margaret was mentally incompetent and that I was helping them save the estate. I am not senile." "Rick," I said, looking him in the eye, "I was just trusting. That is slander." Sophie spat, though her face had gone pale. Elena ignored her. "Mrs. Lane has sufficient evidence right now to file criminal charges for identity theft, wire fraud, and financial abuse of an elder. In the state of Vermont, these carry mandatory prison sentences." Daniel slumped back in his chair. The arrogance was gone. He looked small. "However," Elena continued, "my client is a mother. She has chosen to offer a softer path, provided you cooperate fully." Elena picked up the trust document I had signed. The Lane Women's Resilience Trust has a specific clause regarding the future of this cottage. Upon Margaret's passing, this property will not go to her son. It will be transferred to a non-profit organization to serve as a free recovery retreat for older women who have been victims of financial abuse. The irony hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Sophie had wanted a retreat. Now there would be one, built on the ashes of her greed. As for Daniel, Elena added, he is entitled to a small, fixed stipend from the estate, but only on the condition that he completes a court-approved therapy program and repays 20% of the stolen funds within 5 years. "This is a joke," Sophie screamed, jumping to her feet. "This is moral manipulation. You cannot do this. I will sue you. I will sue you for undue influence. You brainwashed him." Elena did not even blink. "Go ahead and sue, Mrs. Lane. Please. I would love to introduce these forged documents into the public record during discovery. I imagine your investors at Nova Ledger would be very interested to read them." Rick made a noise in his throat. He hurriedly gathered his briefcase and the unsigned appraisal forms. "I am leaving," Rick announced. He looked at me, shame coloring his face. "Mrs. Lane, I apologize. Truly. I should have verified everything." He walked out the door without looking at Daniel. His departure was the sound of the market correcting itself. The deal was dead. The money was gone. Elena clasped her hands on the table. "So, here are your 2 choices. Option 1. We proceed with full litigation. We file the police report today. Sophie will likely face felony charges. Daniel, you will be named as a co-conspirator. You will face bankruptcy, disbarment from your industry, and likely prison time. She paused to let the words sink in. Option 2. You sign a civil settlement agreement right now. You admit to the debts. You agree to a repayment plan. You sign away any and all future claims to the cottage and the townhouse. You walk away with your freedom, but with nothing else. The room seemed to shrink. The silence was thick, pressing against my eardrums. Daniel looked at his hands, then at the door where Rick had fled, and finally at me. For the first time, he realized he was not just looking at a loss of inheritance. He was standing on the edge of a cliff, looking down at the destruction of his entire life. I did not say a word. I just watched him. I let the silence stretch out, heavy and unbearable. A weight I had carried for months that was now finally, rightfully, resting on his shoulders. Elena motioned for the neighbors and Rick to step out onto the porch. She followed them, closing the heavy oak door with a soft click, leaving me alone in the living room with my son. Outside the window, the sky had finally opened up. A thin, cold rain was falling, blurring the surface of the lake and washing away the last warmth of the afternoon. Daniel collapsed into the armchair where his father used to sit. He put his head in his hands and began to weep. It was not the loud, angry crying of a child, but the jagged, gasping sobs of a man who has realized he is broken. I just wanted to stop feeling so small. He choked out, not looking at me. After Dad died, I felt like I disappeared. I was just a mid-level employee in a cubicle. Sophie. She made me feel like I was important, like I was a king, taking a little money from you. At first, it felt harmless, just a loan. I told myself I would pay it back before you even noticed. I sat on the edge of the sofa. I did not rush to hug him. I did not offer him a tissue. That part of our life was over. I spent nights sitting in this dark kitchen. Daniel, I said, my voice steady and quiet. I counted quarters for milk. I felt shame every time my card was declined. You did not just take money. You took my dignity. You looked at me and you did not see your mother. You saw an asset to be liquidated. He looked up, his eyes red and swollen. I know. God, I know. Then he took a shuddering breath. There is something else. Sophie is pregnant. I felt a jolt in my chest. But he held up a hand. But I do not know if it is mine. He whispered, the admission tearing out of him. I found texts, but I was so scared. Mom, I thought if I secured this deal, if I got the money, it would not matter. We could just be a family. If this all blows up, that baby is going to be born into a war zone. Listen to me, I said, my voice hardening. No matter whose blood that child has. No child deserves to grow up in a house built on lies. You cannot buy a happy family with stolen money. I placed the settlement agreement Elena had drafted on the table between us. This is your way out. I told him. You admit to the debts. You agree to a strict repayment schedule. You surrender any future claim to this cottage or the townhouse. You go to court-ordered therapy. And if the police need to investigate Sophie's forgery, you tell them the truth. Daniel looked at the paper. His hand trembled as he reached for a pen. If I sign this, will you forgive me? I looked at him, my heart aching, but my resolve unbreakable. Forgiveness is possible. Daniel? But forgetting is not. You have to accept that you do not have a mother who will cover for you anymore. You have a mother who will hold you accountable. Suddenly, the front door banged open. Sophie stormed in, her hair wet from the rain, her mascara running down her face in dark streaks. She looked wild. "Get in the car! Daniel!" she screamed. "Right now. Do not let them bully you. No one can make you sign that Daniel stood up." He looked at Sophie, vibrating with rage and panic. Then he looked at me, sitting still and silent. For the first time in his life, he was standing between two women without a credit card to smooth the path. He had to choose. "She is going to ruin us, Daniel," Sophie shrieked, grabbing his arm. "I will tell everyone. I will post everything on social media. I will say she abused you." Daniel looked down at her hand on his arm. He gently, but firmly, peeled her fingers off his jacket. "Go," he said. His voice was raspy, but it did not waver. Sophie stepped back, stunned. "I said go," Daniel repeated. He turned his back on her, sat down at the table, and picked up the pen. Sophie let out a sound that was half scream, half growl. "You traitor, you weak, pathetic little man." She spun around and ran out of the cottage. Through the window, I saw her sprint toward the driveway. She slipped in the mud near her car, falling hard onto her hands and knees. For a second, she stayed there, humiliated and wet, before scrambling up and diving into the driver's seat. She had lost her leverage, and without it, she could not stand. Inside, the only sound was the scratching of a pen on paper. Daniel signed the last page. He set the pen down, his hands still shaking violently. I reached out and took the folder. It felt heavy in my hands, heavier than the timber and stone of the house itself. It was the weight of my own power, reclaimed after a long, dark winter. I did not hug him then. I stood up and walked to the screen door, nodding to Eleanor, who was watching from the porch with a grim smile. I turned back to look at my son. "You can walk out that door right now as an accomplice," I said softly, "or you can stay, pay your price, and learn how to be a decent human being. But no matter what you choose, this cottage and my life will never be anyone's collateral again." Thank you so much for listening to my story. It was not easy to share, but I hope it helps someone out there stand up for themselves. I would love to know where you are tuning in from. So please drop a comment below with your city or country. Let's see how far this story travels. If you enjoyed this, please subscribe to Grandma's Family Diary, hit that like button, and smash the hype button to help this video get recommended to more people. Stay strong, everyone.